Dear coaches, head coaches, coaching program directors, let me say a few words about feedback, because this is an issue that is extremely important and one that we didn't quite fully figure out yet. So we've tried different approaches to coaches giving feedback to the students, and not every model worked, and there are some things that we have learned, and there are still some things that we have to figure out. I would like to summarize the logic and logistics of coaches giving feedback to the students so that you together can develop a system that provides the best process for coaches giving feedback to the students. Let me stress first what the outcome of this process should be. So when we plan it, it's very important that we understand what the final product should be. So the outcome should be something, a document, that we can share with the students. And that's very important to understand. And let me show you on the screen why. For example, here is the last set of feedback that I received from you on the submissions from the early track. And as you will see, it's not something I can easily share with the students. For example, just open randomly. Like here I have an Excel file created by one of the coaches with a few sentences of feedback on each team's submission. It's very short. It's not very useful and developmental. So it's more of a general evaluation rather than feedback, in a sense, the developmental constructive feedback that the team can use to do a better job. Plus, how do I share this? I mean, I have the team number, but do I then manually send it to each team separately? I mean, that's just not very convenient. Here is another form of feedback. Now this one comes in a Word file, and this one is very differently formatted, looks very, very nice. Great job, coaches who did it. But then again, it's individual feedback to each team, and then how do I share this? I mean, do I copy each page separately and send it to the team? Do I share it to all the teams at the same time? So wonderful, great job done here. And in fact, I like that they integrated it. So great. I mean, in fact, that's one of the best I've seen, but it's very different from first, the one that I just showed you before. And second, how exactly do I share this? Share with all the teams, or again, becomes an issue. Here is another one, this time in a PDF file again. So again, a few sentences for each team. And I'm not even sure what I can do about it, because again, I do see the team number. So I mean, it's many more steps that need to be taken for me to share this with the teams. I need to find team 37, find their emails, copy and paste. I mean, how would I do this? And it's not even clear, like if the previous one had perfect formatting, you know, this one, I don't even know what company that is. So again, very, very inconvenient to share. So, and then let's see what else we have here. I have, well, let's take this one, for example. So this one's again in Excel. And here we have a line of text for each of the company, and we have team numbers, but then we have some unnumbered submissions. And again, you know, some work that again, not quite suitable for sharing, at least not in this format. Now, we tried approach like this where the feedback would be provided to each company. And so what happens is, yeah, so here's another one with teams. What happens is that people can process only so much information. And so what happens is when you are assigned to evaluate 20, 30, 50 reports, you cannot go deep on each submission. You end up with something like this. So basically you see here copied and pasted some of the text. Like for example, all of them spend more time on formatting and referencing. I mean, it is kind of developmental, but it's generic, it's repetitive. And so taken separately, like if this is the only feedback I sent to that team, it wouldn't be very useful because it's too short, it's too generic. So not a very good approach. So therefore, after trying to evaluate each team's submission separately, when we have so many teams, I came to the conclusion that it would work much better. And by the way, I talked about that in the training materials. It would work much better if we provided not a few words of very superficial, generic, copy and pasted comments to each team, but instead, if we provided 5 pages of general feedback not to a particular team, but to the whole cohort, but in much more depth. So instead of looking at 50 submissions and saying each one, good job, do a better referencing, I would say that instead, write same 5 pages, but do it like this. One, you say that I've read 50 reports, and here is my general impressions, recommendations, and observations. Then you have a section, maybe a page or so, where you discuss common problems. For example, you say I read 50 reports, and these are the problems I see over and over again. For example, your references are not good. And then you explain for several paragraphs what the problem is. So that's not how you do it. It's too short. Company will not be able to find the sources, and maybe say a few words how to do it, or provide some references to resources where they can find guidelines for how to do it. You also say perhaps that maybe some of the reports have a lot of text and it's all packed together, impossible to read. Again, provide a snapshot of what that problem looks like. Maybe from 1 or 2 reports, explain why it is a problem, explain what can be done to avoid this problem in the future, what a better way to do it. So you may have 3, 5, 10 maybe typical mistakes that you discuss, provide snapshots, provide examples, discuss why there are problems and what can be done. Then another section, again, another page, maybe 2, maybe 3, 5, 10 examples of good solutions. You could say, okay, here are some interesting things I've seen this time. For example, this team presented information in this very effective way. That's a very interesting graph. Here is a snapshot. That's what it looks like. You should try to do it more. So you may even mention the number of the team that did it. Or maybe you saw some interesting business solution. Okay, everybody recommends this entry mode, but one company or one team recommended a different entry mode. And they provided a very interesting explanation. So please take a look, and here is my explanation why I think that's a great idea. And maybe in the end, some conclusions or general list of kind of do's and don'ts, or maybe some other links to resources. This way you will end up with the same 5, 6, maybe pages, but it would be feedback that I can share as a single document with the entire group of teams that work on this challenge. And it will be very deep. And since you look at common problems and common interests and solutions, much of that will apply to every team, because again, most of them will be making the same mistakes. So there is no need to copy and paste that stuff several times, and we can put it in much more detail in a coherent, nice document. So ideally, I'd like to get something that looks like a PDF file, separate file for each of the companies. So we have about 12, 13 companies in the Lake Track. So ideally, I'd like to have a separate PDF file. And so that will allow me to easily share the document with the teams. I just send a link or attachment, everybody gets it. Because again, if we go team by team, the sharing becomes an issue. We can do it, we can program mail merge, or we can use Qualtrics to send individual feedback to each team. But as I said, when I see feedback that is just a few sentences, it's so superficial that it's sometimes even like it's not good enough to be shared with the team. I mean, teams will be disappointed. And so, as I said, I fully understand that within the available time you have and with the many teams, you cannot do more. But that's why I'm saying perhaps we shouldn't do more for each team, but rather should do much more for the cohort in general. There are several challenges, though, when it comes to creating those individual PDF files with detailed, deep feedback for each company. First, we will have multiple coaches per company, right? So this time we have about 40 coaches. We have about 13 companies, so it's like 4 coaches per company. So in the past, we tried when individual coaches submit their work to me or to the program director, and then we have 4 documents that are almost impossible to merge. Much of that stuff is repetitive. You can't just copy and paste them in one document, but it takes forever, probably even more time than prepare that feedback, merging it together. So it would be nice if the coaches themselves worked as a team, but produced one single coherent document that would go to either me or the coaching director. They can do it by either everybody works independent and then they sit down together and look at what they have and then try to produce a final integrated document, or they can divide the workload in a way that it will be copy and paste. Maybe somebody will talk about common problems and somebody will specifically focus on interesting solutions, and another one will talk specifically on formatting and referencing. And so this way it would be a separate blog, but since they're not overlapping, you can literally copy and paste them together, make sure that the formatting is fine, and submit as a document. So that's a solution. Another challenge is that the companies are differently popular, as I said. This time, the most popular company is Vertical Journey, and now Lateristia, the company that makes tea. And so we have 330 teams working, for example, on Lateristia's challenge. So that's like 40% of all of the teams. Does it mean that we should have more coaches working on this challenge? If we do it proportionally, that means that we will have about 10 coaches assigned to this specific challenge, maybe even 12. How would you merge all of that? Would it lead to redundancy? My recommendation is that we assign an equal number of coaches to each company. And we shouldn't worry that some of them have 300 reports and some have 25 reports. I would say that those that have 25 reports, they read all reports. Those that have 300 reports, they just read a random selection of 30, maybe 40, maybe 50 reports. And they will say, yes, we've looked through their reports, and presumably the sample is random and representative, and this is what we have. You don't have to read each single one of them. Possibly, but again, it would be a waste of time, and you will see a lot of repetition, and there is really no need to read all 300 of them to get an idea of the common mistakes and solutions. And so this way it will be much easier to have a more balanced number of coaches per company. They will all produce a document, so 3-4 people can collaborate on providing one document, but 10, that becomes too difficult, too hard. So I'd say that would be a much more efficient system. Now, we also tried ranking each report or rating each report, and so that's something we can do. So I'm talking here about specifically numbers and numbers only. So we can either use a 5-point scale where 5 is excellent, 4 is good, 3 is average or okay, acceptable, 2 is bad, and 1 is very bad. And in that case, we may look at every report and just give them one number so that they sort of know how they're doing. But then they would read the bigger 5-page document for all the students where they will try to see what the common problems are. Or in one semester, we used more of a kind of ranking system. Again, it would be hard to rank 1,000 reports, from the best to the worst. But what we did is each report was looked at by like 3 or 4 coaches, and each report was evaluated on a 5-point scale where 5 was the best report in the cohort that I've seen, or in the group that I saw this time. 4, it was better than average. 3 was about average. 2 was worse than average, and 1 was below average. And so we tried to kind of group it in a way that 3 average would be given to about 50-60% of the reports. 2 and 4, so below average, above average, would be given each to about 10, 15, 20%. And then 1 and 5, like way below above average and below average, like maybe 10 reports each, like 5% at most. So this way students know how they do compared to other teams. The only problem was that in that case, 3 is the average, and students thought that 3 is like almost unsatisfactory. And so we had to explain, no, it's roughly the same as everybody else's. So in the end, we ended up not giving them the numbers, but giving the explanation. Your work is as good as about average, or your work is better than the average, or your work is much better than the average. And so that way it was kind of informing them how they do relative to others. So it's a viable approach. You don't have to type anything to them. You just give a specific one number. But even that, again, if you can review all of them and rank them, it would be wonderful. But I would much rather spend that time on providing in-depth general report than trying to give very shallow report or evaluation to each single submission. And so a couple more things that I want to say. So we are also, let me share the screen here. It may be the time now to develop some standardized guidelines for how these feedback documents should be formatted. For example, we do already have a couple of presentations, and you can watch my video presentation, YouTube presentation. I'll provide the link later. Where I talk about, for example, the reports and my own impressions, about the reports that I've seen. So if you look at them here, so it's actually your Module 16 training module for coaches. So we talk about reports. So what a title page looks like. Here is an example of a good one. Here's an example of a good one. Here is an example of a good one that contains some description of who did what. So I have some examples. So, but then also I'll have some examples that are perhaps not necessarily, best. Like, for example, here, too much text, almost impossible to read. And here is an example, again, executive summary that is text. Nobody wants to read this stuff. And so that's what you can talk about. Again, I have a 40-minute review of, what a good executive summary looks like, and that this one is a much better one. So here you have some bullet list, easy to see what section, is where. And, by looking at this executive summary, you can quickly scan the report for the main ideas. And so perhaps we could have guidelines like this, formatting guidelines like this for what the document should look like. Yes, you can have some examples of good things, bad things, some explanations. So we haven't really developed the document yet, but we have developed documents for executive analytics summaries. So when the report is over, the project is over, we hire some people or ask coaches to prepare analytic summaries of the reports for the clients. Again, like if it's a company that has TIA, the company is going to get 300 reports. So it's like this much paper, like 2 feet, half a meter of paper. Obviously, they cannot read it. And so we always try to provide an analytic summary. And here is an example of one of such summaries for a company last semester that participated last semester. And so, we have a nice summary of the SWOT, for example, strength listed by the team's weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And here they list main competitors. Again, the number of teams that provided those competitors are listed. And, so we do have a training module specifically for how to write an analytic summary. And this is what it looks like. So we have a nice, properly formatted document in XCulture colors and format. And so we have some, instructions for where to download the documents and what companies we had that semester. And this is how we would summarize it. So, for example, frequencies of, recommended countries, and maybe, frequencies of the recommended or observed strength and weaknesses and stuff like that. And then some graphical representation of, recommended markets and things like that. So obviously this document would not work to guide you as to what the best way is to provide feedback to the students, but maybe it is time to develop such guidelines for how to give feedback on the weekly deliverables and then the final document. And so that way everybody would be using the same format, we will use the same font, the same graphics, the same length, the same structure. It will be easier to integrate and share with the students. So that's basically where we stand. As I said, I don't like the idea of assigning more coaches or of assigning coaches to teams. I like the idea of assigning coaches to companies regardless of how many teams they have, although I'm open to the idea of proportional assignment. It just seems to me that the more popular team companies will have too many coaches, and there is no need for 10 coaches to provide generic feedback, and vice versa, there may be not enough for the less popular companies. But then again, if we decided to say at least a few words or provide a number on each submission, maybe that's not such a bad approach. Yeah, so I guess the challenge is how do we develop a system so that on Monday we download the weekly deliverables and they are immediately distributed to the coaches or whoever does the distribution, the coaching program director knows immediately who should be getting what and sends it directly within an hour after downloading the data. Then the coaches know what to do and how to do it and have the feedback ready by, let's say, Thursday. A reminder should go out maybe, for those who are not meeting the deadline or approaching the deadline. And then we need to have an efficient way to share this with me in, as I said, a shareable PDF file, or if it's an Excel file, then again, standard formatting of the Excel file. And then either I can share this with the students or maybe even the coaching director, for example, distributes it directly to the students. For example, post those documents on the XCulture's resource page. And so the students will know that around Thursday or maybe Friday, the feedback will appear on that website. So they just go and download it. Or we can send it out as an attachment by email. So in this way, the system would work clockwise, like a clock. At this time, it's too late to provide feedback to the early track. They're done. So we will provide some feedback in the end so that they can learn from it for future projects. But they cannot use it now to improve their work this time. But for the late track, it's perfect timing. So next week, they will be submitting the first deliverable. So we need to have a system in place by Monday. And hopefully we will have them feedback within a week on each of the weekly deliverables. So just to summarize, the way I see it is this. Monday, the coaching director downloads the deliverables from Qualtrics or Turnitin, depending on which week it is. In advance, the coaching director develops a assignment, a scheme, so where we know which coaches are assigned to which companies or teams. Once the documents are downloaded on Monday morning, the coaching director distributes it to the coaches for evaluation. The coaches, I suppose, read many reports, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever the number is. And as they're reading those reports, they're making notes. They're noting things that they like, they don't like, things that they see can be improved. They can be working in teams for, let's say, for example, coaches per company, and they can divide the workload in a way that each reads 10 reports, or each one reads all the reports, but they pay attention to different things. Then around Wednesday or Thursday, the coaches consolidate their work, either by reading everything and then producing a single document, or if they're responsible for different types of feedback. Somebody looks at the positives, somebody looks at the negatives, somebody looks at the formatting issues and stuff like that, then you just copy and paste it all together. And then Thursday, maybe Friday, they consolidate it, and then following our guidelines in a specific, as I said, format and style, submitted to the coaching director. The coaching director receives it on Thursday or Friday, and then make sure that everything's consistent. All the submissions should be in Word, not PDF, in case some changes need to be made. And so the coaching director then makes sure that everything's fine, and once it's fine, it either is then posted to the website as a separate document for each company, or it's consolidated into one big gigantic PDF file with the table of contents and page numbers for each company. So this way we may have 14 companies, 5, 6 pages per company, so the whole document can be 100 pages or so. But if the students want to read the whole thing, they read the whole thing. If they just want to read their own company, they just click on that link in the table of contents, go directly to that section and read their 5 pages. It's shared with all of the students either by email and or on the website, so they get it directly on Friday, and so that they can use that feedback to improve their work next week. And then the cycle repeats itself at the end of the week, and perhaps we take a little bit more time and maybe provide more detailed feedback at the end on the final reports once they're submitted, and again share that feedback at the end of the project. One also important thing or benefit of using this kind of general feedback, not only that we can go much deeper, but also that we can sort of recycle it from semester to semester. So if it's the same company that participated before, we can use the feedback from the last semester. Much of this will still apply to the teams here. We can share it proactively, so even before we see their submissions, we can tell them about what the typical mistakes are based on our knowledge of the submissions from the last semester. But then we can read the new batch of reports, use it, observe it, and maybe improve that feedback even more. So refine some parts, say a few things, make it deeper, make it even more insightful, make it even more developmental. So maybe drop some things that are now irrelevant, so maybe the students are different this semester. But it would give us some foundation that we can work with, and as a result provide much more in-depth feedback. So coaches, I encourage you to give it some thought. I leave the final decisions with Kim and Tim as to the process. You've heard my opinion, but maybe it would be even a good idea to have a quick coach meeting where you can share some of your thoughts. But again, to me, it's not really that important how exactly we do it, as long as in the end, so there may be many ways to organize this process. For me, as long as on Monday the materials are downloaded, and by around Friday, Saturday, the latest, we have nice, clean, readable, developmental, deep, constructive feedback. That's all that matters. How you get to that point, as I said, there are different ways to do it, and perhaps even experiment and see what works best. All right? Thank you so much.